Good afternoon and welcome to NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinar Series, our premier digital educational platform featuring a variety of interactive programming to provide you and your team timely, engaging, and essential education when and where you need it most. My name is Brian Gilbert, the Deputy Director of Events here at NCIA, and as always, I'm very excited to welcome you all to another special edition of our monthly Catalyst Conversation series today. Now, let's get this show on the road. For today's program, NCIA's Risk Management and Insurance Committee has teamed up with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee to create a powerful discussion every social equity operator should join in on. During this webinar, our panel of experts will lead a lively discussion about the very real threats to the survival of small cannabis businesses and the ways to mitigate those risks. Before we get started, a huge shout out though, and thank you to our presenting sponsor of today's session, App Team. They've supported a number of other recent educational offerings underneath of our webinar program, and we'll be working with our team to produce a service solutions program later next month in October. So please head to App Team's website following today's program, and I hope that you'll be able to join in on that conversation later next month as well. And then additionally, a huge shout out and thank you to the benefactors of NCIA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion program, with this month's featured company being People's Ecosystem. All these amazing businesses have really taken their commitment to social equity to the next level by providing significant financial support of all of our DEI efforts across the association. So please head to this short link following today's program to learn more about each of these pioneering businesses and how you can join them moving forward. All right, and with that, we've got a packed panel which is eager to dive into the discussion, and our audience is interested in having all their questions answered along the way. So let's not waste any more time. To kick things off, I'd like to welcome NCIA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager, Mike Lamuto, to the virtual stage first to give you all a better understanding of the Catalyst Conversations program as a whole and how that interfaces with our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts across the association. Welcome to the stage, Mike. You can take it away from here.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. Really excited for today. I really want to thank all the panelists today and thank the two committees, the DEI committee and the Risk Management Insurance Committee. Just as Brian mentioned, this is part of the Catalyst Conversations. And for those of you that are new to the Catalyst Conversations is a series that we're putting together of really kind of like, I would call it 101 level, but really on a deeper level of 101. So maybe like 201 level. Kind of understanding of the industry from different perspectives. It's a way that we collaborate with different committees within NCIA to bring knowledge, and it's going to be part of our larger mentorship program that we've been starting out over the last few months and building slowly. Over the next year, we're going to be ramping it up, and these Catalyst Conversations and the recordings will actually be a big part of that curriculum for mentees that enter the program to be able to have a good jumping off point. So I wanted to now introduce our moderator today, Summer Jenkins. Just as a little bit of background, Summer and I connected a few months ago. She reached out and was like, hey, there's this great talk that she had done actually that she shared with us about kind of the history of the inequities and social justice issues around cannabis. And, being a part of the Risk Management Insurance Committee, I thought it was a great segue into having this conversation about security and insurance and how it's maybe a little bit different sometimes when you are coming from that social equity and or legacy space, and that's very much impacted by the devastation of the war on drugs and the inequities that exist. So Summer, really appreciate you bringing your depth of understanding of all these different pieces to this conversation today. I'm really excited to listen to you moderate today, and I'm going to go ahead and step back now and hand over to you, Summer. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mike. And thank you so much for being the catalyst for this conversation. I think these issues are very important, and I look forward to engaging in this discussion. So my name is Summer Jenkins. I am a risk management professional, underwriter, and have also authored quite a few of the insurance coverage forms that are in circulation today. So I also partner with other organizations like Oaksterdam and do education for social equity. So I'm very pleased to be here and also to introduce the rest of our guests. So Chris, Perry, Kevin, could you guys, there we are. So thank you so much. Chris, if you don't mind, if you could please go first and just introduce yourself and give us a little bit about your background and maybe share with the audience why are you here today and why do you care about social equity?
Perfect. Thank you for introducing me. My name is Christopher Jensen. I am the cannabis market manager for March Networks. March Networks is a global video surveillance manufacturer. So we make the cameras, the recorders, and the software that drives the systems. We're number one in banking. We work a lot in the retail space, transport, and as I think 2018, we made cannabis our fourth vertical. In November 1st, we'll be 9 years in the cannabis space. So it's been a wild ride. We've been all building the plane as we fly it, and we're still doing it today. So it's been really amazing. And then also I have the great honor and responsibility of sitting on the NCIA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee as the vice chair. So we just had our first meeting today. So really excited about that, really excited to help. Social equity to me, I've just seen so many people all over this country that have been really affected negatively by the war on drugs, whether they had a parent or a sibling or a family member that was on drugs, whether they were trying to make ends meet and they got caught up in the legal system, whether that's, or just, when it comes to people of color, where you just have a little bit in your pocket and you can end up, doing years in prison. So those things are very important to me. And as being somebody that has a platform and a voice that can speak out, that grew up in a house where people were addicted to drugs, that were selling drugs, and being able to see my way out of that, I just feel I have an obligation to give back and to speak for people that may not feel that they have a voice or are not strong enough yet to speak their voice. Thank you very much for having me. I'm honored.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Chris. Kevin, how about you? Can you give us a little bit about your background and tell us why social equity is important to you?
Yes, thank you so much, Summer. My name is Kevin Haller. I'm a CPA in both Oregon and California. I work with Keen Consulting. I focus kind of on the audit side, so I do financial statement audits. However, given taxes are such a significant pain point to this industry, I know enough to be deadly in tax conversations. We've been serving the cannabis space at a professional level since 2015. However, I'm a longtime user of cannabis and advocate for cannabis. Why social equity? One, I have 2 daughters, and it's very important to me that there's equality for them as they grow up. 2, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis 4 years ago. I have access to medicine and treatment because people that aren't affected by that disease have dedicated their resources and time to help people with that. And so I just look at social equity as long overdue to help individuals to create a level playing field. So I'm here to do my part to give my professional advice to help this industry really thrive.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin. And so Perry, how about you?
Hey everyone, my name is Perry Jones. I am the CEO and co-founder, 100% owner of Cali Hills, which is a sponsored San Francisco equity company. I've been working in the cannabis field for over 15 years now. From my expertise from coming from what we would call the illicit market, the black market, which was targeted as the war on drugs. Thanks to the legislation when it comes to equity, I've been in a fortunate position to be able to be in the process phase where I'll be having a retail spot here in San Francisco for safe access to the community at large. What it means to me, this is a chance for me to change the narrative, to change the face when it comes to cannabis, and also to be a gatekeeper when it comes to protecting those equity companies from predatory deals, as we've seen within our first, coming of the equity opportunity that we have. It means a lot to me because there's not, everyone will have the opportunity that I have to be able to speak and represent their experiences, whether they were addicted because of cannabis, and a lot of the stigmas that come with it. We're able to change the narrative, and it means a lot to me because, it's an opportunity for me to change history and to educate and to be educated.
Thank you so much, Perry. And so I'll share with you, the audience, why I care about social equity. As you can see, I'm a double minority, female, woman of color. Um, and, you know, growing up, I have just seen the way people are treated that are poor, or people that are treated that are people of color. And the disparity between education and business services for poor people versus those that are offered to people from more affluent backgrounds or different socioeconomical backgrounds is huge. So I volunteer in a number of capacities, but to help. So using my information, my knowledge, my insights to just give back and to help level the playing field, so that poor people or people that might be considered as least likely or undesirable can have the same advantage and a fair advantage in business and industry that people that have more money have. So that's why social equity is important to me. So looking forward to getting into this discussion, gentlemen. So the topic today is risk, security, and insurance. And these things mean something completely different in the regulated market. So I'd like to just maybe glean some information from your experience, Chris. You know, with your background in security and you know, surveillance and all of these very interesting things that equity applicants and all cannabis operators have to use. What have you seen in your experience? What have you seen work well?
Yeah, so I would say from a security perspective, let's take it all the way back to the application phase. Any way you slice it, in every single state, security is about 25% of your application. It is very important. And when we talk about security, we're talking about physical security, which means your alarm systems, your access control with your key card access, your video surveillance. I'd say another component to that is your cybersecurity, and that's probably where you should probably start, is your IT infrastructure, because all of these systems.
So Chris, let me pause you there for 1 second. So when you say cybersecurity, what do you mean by cybersecurity? What does that mean?
Yeah, so if we could just take a step back. So when you're planning out these systems and you're planning out your physical security, which is your video surveillance, et cetera, your cybersecurity, your IT infrastructure. So the network, your local area network, the different networks that your systems are going to run on, and then protecting those systems and these internet of devices that are going to be running on your network from attacks. In cannabis in particular, there was just an article that came out last week. Cannabis is rife for ransomware, and what ransomware is when someone hijacks your network, they infect it with viruses, or they steal information and passwords, and then they will sell it back to you, holding all your information for ransom, and that could really cripple your business. It could put you out of business. If you're a medical provider, and we're starting to get into where HIPAA and PCI compliance is something, and people have those records, you're in direct federal violation. So this is a big deal. So when you're thinking about security, take a step back, get your IT infrastructure in place, make sure your cybersecurity is taken care of, and then we can talk about putting these different, physical security components in place.
Okay, so so that's what's important. Those are the things that we should look out for. Yes. What have you seen in your experience go wrong?
Oh, wow. Just so going wrong is not having a team of folks that you can trust and get the appropriate advice. So vetting out the different vendors, working with folks like Kevin, like yourself, like Perry, who is going through it and has been through it, and getting their experiences, talking to somebody that's in the security space that can give you, the rundown of what to look for, and not just have, hey, do this thing because I'm really good at it and it makes me money, but here, this is where you're at. This is what's maybe appropriate for you. Here are some alternatives, 1, 2, 3, good, better, good, better, best. So making sure you have a good team of folks, making sure that the folks that are working with you, that you understand if they have a vested interest in the technology that they're proposing. And hopefully, if they're doing their job appropriately and being a trusted advisor, they should be educating you on what's out there so that you can make the appropriate decision for your business long term. And I would say the biggest thing is building your foundation and figuring out what type of business are you going to be. Are you just going to be a craft cannabis business and you're going to have one location, or are we aspiring to be a multi-state operator? There's going to be a different technology suite that you want to pick depending on what your overall goal is long-term. And if your long-term goal is to scale, then think about that at the beginning so you don't have to go back and retrofit things.
Yeah. So it sounds like
and what's went wrong is people have worked with jokers and then they come in and tell you where Sarah had to answer your question, and they tell you and they promise you the world, and then you end up, not having the communication, not talking about how you're going to service it after the fact. I think that's the biggest thing. It's easy to get somebody secure and in compliance. Staying in compliance is the hard part. So making sure that you have a service agreement or a maintenance agreement and a really sound understanding with your security provider of, after you've installed this, after I've purchased this, then what? That's where it goes wrong. And that's where you see multiple providers coming in. And then when you start to play that game, now I come in as a security professional. I don't want to service somebody else's work. I want to change it out and put my stuff in and go forward. So that's where you can get, start spending a lot of money keeping up with or fixing somebody else's problem that you could have handled in the beginning.
So pick a good advisor, do it right the first time, and maintenance contract, right? That's the part that I haven't heard that before.
Staying in compliance. Yes.
So Perry, I'm curious, what has your experience been like? So I know you got your dispensary, you're fully licensed and ready to do your operations out there in San Francisco. But what was your experience like with getting all the permits and having security systems done? How did you pick your advisor, and how'd that go? What was the experience like for you?
For me, starting off, it was really a challenge because I'm pretty sure we all know that when it comes to banking for cannabis, that's something that is not accessible. So just basically having, the means to be able to have the capital resources in order to have a security system that's, that's able to do the job that effectively has been a problem. Thanks to, the grant system that we have here in San Francisco, we've been able to gain assistance and also, get good advisory from people such as Chris when it comes to security systems, which is very important when you got, equity companies such as myself that's emerging from the, illicit market. So security is really important for me, whether it's me just coming out doing a perimeter check for my 600 feet, and also for my customers getting safe access. For me, it's been, really good with having security systems that actually specialize within the cannabis industry and what, needs to be looked at and what's going to be suitable for the Article 16 for the law enforcement aspect of it. But for the most part, it's been a challenge, but thanks to the grant systems and such, we've been able to get support with that aspect of it. And security is definitely something that's very important. A lot of us may forget that, some people still is on the illicit market and may target such companies. So it's very important to have security from the inside and out, even, just watching your staff system, making sure for profit and loss, that there's no profit and loss coming from the inside. So you probably want to, I would advise to watch the outside as well as the in.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I heard recently, and Chris, you may know, there was some kind of acronym that somebody else that specialized in security said, but it was some like a methodology for understanding your security. But it had to do with like outside threat identification. And there was something he said that was like hostile shrubbery. Have you ever heard somebody say something like that?
SEPTED, I believe. I think you're referring
that,
to.
Yeah.
Crime prevention through environmental design. So get out of a couple of key points. So crime prevention through environmental design. Essentially, what that means is somebody comes in and does a risk assessment of the area to make sure, you understand what are the overall threats in that area. And then they'll take a look at physically what the surrounding area of the property looks like. So do we have shrubs? Is it blocking our view? Do we want to put a privacy screen up? Are we chopping down limbs so people can't gain access to the roof from a tree? Those types of things. And then Perry, you hit the nail on the head. Most of your threat is internal. It's internal employees and shrink is what they call it. So in a traditional, retail or banking, they write into their budgets, 1 to 3% shrink. And that's sometimes just waste. It could be waste. theft, etc. So writing in, procedures on how you're going to respond to security threats, but also what you're going to do with your video, and that's visual data. So you should be monitoring those cameras to see what's going on in your operation when you're not there, to see if people are following procedure. It does fall on you. It falls on the license holder at the end of the day. So you need to hold people accountable. Very
interesting. I swear I learned so much from just being engaged with the other experts. The step TED was very interesting for me, even for my businesses and even for my home. So I thought that was awesome.
And I do believe it's a requirement in California too. So I believe in certain states, California in particular, SEPTED is a requirement to get your license. So it's something to think about.
Indeed, I did not know that. From a financial side, what types of threats are risks to the business owner should equity operators and owners be looking out for? What should they be aware of?
I assume that was directed to me, so I'll take a first crack at that. And Chris touched on it. Really, it's building a foundation, right? What I see as the biggest risk is this industry cost. There's so much capital needed to launch a successful and compliant cannabis business, and normally the money goes towards operations, and what goes to the wayside often is the financial reporting piece. I see underqualified individuals maintaining the books. You see a lack of understanding around 280E and the difference between producers and resellers. You see,
Kevin, what do you mean by underqualified?
Normally there's a lack of resources. So a lot of small businesses, they'll set someone in to do the books who has very limited bookkeeping knowledge to properly set up a system of internal control to setting up a proper chart of accounts. And so normally I see that, just because of a lack of resources and just, what the money left and where it goes, most businesses don't take the financial side of things as important as operations. However, internal controls, there's 3 pillars that any one of those pillars can be devastating to a business, and they are operations, reporting, and compliance. We are in one of the most compliant industries today because you're dealing with something federally illegal. And therefore, in the reporting around that, because it's federally illegal, you have 280E. So you have non-compliance, not only from a tax perspective, but we kind of touched on, if you're in this business to long-term, be an operator long-term, you're going to need capital infused at some point. So you're going to have to, any serious investor is going to require due diligence or some type of oversight of your records. If you are going to sell, there's going to be due diligence. You're going to be, held under a microscope. Right now, there's a lot of mergers and acquisitions going just because really the value is in the license. So you see licenses being acquired when it's more so just for the sake of building up that portfolio for what is next. I attribute a lot of equity operators to really wanting to build long-term generational wealth for their families. So they really need to invest and build a business that's going to last. And you're going to need investors coming in that are aligned with you. And so, there's the risks go on and on because you're dealing with a cash intensive business. A lot of businesses aren't filing 8300s when they're receiving cash over certain amounts, or don't have proper security over physical maintenance or even tracking cash, having that part of their accounting close, right? If you're dealing with money.
What is that, Kevin? What's an 8300?
An 8300 is a required form to be filed, and it's mostly for cultivators and distribution companies, maybe manufacturers. Retail is normally not, the limits don't allow for you to sell 10 grand worth of product to one person. But a cultivator, let's say, is sells some product and that distributor, is buying it. That distributor has to report an 8300 within 2 weeks that basically is alerting the regulators that I received cash from this business. Right. So normally things have a paper trail because in a bank you're making payments. So it's very easy for the IRS and regulators to trace where money flows. When you're dealing with cash, you don't have that. And you just see tremendous non-compliance with filing that. And the problem is it could be escalated to criminal penalties if there's an intent to try to deceive and hide those transactions. Mostly what I'm finding is people just are unaware of the rules and regulations and didn't know they had to file that. But you're either then pleading incompetence or you're trying to deceive. So either way, it doesn't look good. And so cash just imposes so many risks for things to go wrong. And so really it's just being understaffed, underqualified, and not understanding all the rules that we're seeing non-compliance.
That's
Good
really
point, Kevin.
interesting. Does somebody else have something to add?
Yeah, I think that's a good point that Kevin brought up when we're talking about risk and security. As I mentioned, we got the grant that came.
You just got muted, Perry. I think I know where he's going with this, but he got me.
Grants to support the company, but if you're not aware of your taxes and your bookkeeping, considering the fact that cannabis is still a Schedule I drug and it's not looked upon good from the feds. So it's very, I got to be careful with how I'm spending my money, where I'm spending my money at, and also accountability, so I won't put my business into risk. So at this time, it's fairly new. It's an innovative thing that we have here, and all money is not good money. This money is good, but it could be bad if it's used inappropriately. And that's where Kevin is touching on when it comes to the risk and securities. It could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. So we're keeping our eyes on that. And me as a CEO, just making sure that I, have someone that have expertise within bookkeeping and taxes.
And if I get, go ahead, Perry, sorry.
Another thing that I was thinking about when we're talking about, security risks, we usually don't think about, we still have an illicit market. Myself, a couple companies here in San Francisco during the COVID have been literally strong-armed, robbed at gunpoint. And sometimes we get comfortable because we know it's legal, we got good staff. Sometimes the police department may frown upon cannabis. So San Francisco got a good thing with Article 16, where we got a lot of good support coming from the police department as well as community. So you also want to have your community engagement aligned with your security floor plan.
I just say, just to piggyback on what Perry said, having, security guards or some sort of executive protection, or, outsourcing your transportation between facilities is highly recommended. Even if you're not carrying cash, everybody thinks you're carrying cash at all times. So outsourcing and talking with local law enforcement, we here in Colorado, I saw from the beginning, like Perry said, they wouldn't even respond to an alarm at a cannabis facility. So you were on your own. As we've been paying taxes and there's more folks getting out and talking about it and voicing their opinion, there's been a rapport built with the law enforcement in the cannabis industry. So it does get better, but it's not going to get better unless we all, reach out and communicate. And it's going to take us on the cannabis side to probably do the reaching out. So something to think about. And I know you're doing it, Perry.
And a couple of things just to add there. One is most fraud that happens at businesses are with the trusted individuals, right? So it's always important to make sure you have sound internal controls, because anytime someone has an opportunity, even trusted people that you love and would say are family, if they're having some hardship in their personal life, people will justify a lot. And actually most fraud is committed by trusted people. So you just got to protect yourself with internal controls. Perry brought up a grant coming through. What's important to know with that is those grants are tied to either a individual social security number or a company's EIN. And so depending on where that grant came, you might, as an individual, if it was your social security, you're reporting that on your 1040. If it was the business, it needs to flow through the business. So you have to make sure the accounting is straight, because if you get the grant, it comes to you personally, you're reporting income, but then you're also infusing that into your business. So you got to just make sure you do all of that. The other thing, the last thing I want to mention is we are dealing with something federally illegal. Entity structure matters greatly. You're talking about something that you can only deduct cost of goods sold. Most social equity is retail. Retail is hit the worst when it comes to 280E in terms of what you can deduct. So why I bring this up is entity structure. If you are a flow through entity like an LLC or an S Corp, you're basically passing those income and deductions onto you as the individual. And so if you're overly aggressive, that tax liability comes to you and you can't get out from under that. One thing I always preach is until cannabis is rescheduled, if I was personally involved in a cannabis business, it would only be a C Corp at this time, because I don't want income and deductions from something still federally illegal being passed through to me, especially knowing most businesses are being very aggressive when it comes to their tax position.
And so, Kevin, let's just take a step back a little bit and like let's dive into 280E.
Yes.
I know that the name is out there, everybody's heard of it, but what does it actually mean? And what are the implications? And then I do want to also have you kind of identify the ways that people are doing the wrong thing with cost of goods sold,
Sure.
also referred to as COGS. But
So
how are they
yeah,
doing the wrong thing that's going to potentially come back and bite them later?
sure. So 280E is applicable to those trafficking a federal illegal substance. It came about when a cocaine dealer filed his taxes, and in the end, they allowed him to only deduct his cost of goods sold, because by definition, cost of goods sold is a reduction of income, but no other deductions were allowed. So what this means is, you know, for cannabis, and you got to follow the definition under 471, right? There's been past reports issued that people take in 263A, which is a section code for how you allocate costs to inventory, was not allowed. That kind of came out of the Harborside case. So what you have to follow is 471. 471 basically divides you into two buckets. You're a producer, cultivator, manufacturer, or you're a reseller, distro, and retail. It's kind of very clear definitions within there in terms of what are cost of goods sold. So producers are allowed to allocate some of their rent, different things like that, because it's all related towards production. If you're on the reseller side, for the most part, it is the cannabis you buy and the freight to bring the cannabis to you. Depending on where you're at, you could possibly allocate some other costs, but it's very limited. But your rent for your building, your bud tenders, if your delivery, your drivers, your vehicles, none of those are cost of goods sold. So you can't allocate them there. So you don't get any tax deductions for those expenses that a non-cannabis business would get. The IRS has issued, you know, that they had their position. The Treasury did a report back in March 2020 that identified 471C. Many of you might have heard that. That was supposed to be the loophole for cannabis businesses. And a lot of advisors had advised businesses to take that. And what most people did is, if you're retail, you treated yourself like a producer and you might have allocated some costs, because basically what people were taking the position is if I track my financials a certain way, as long as I report my taxes in line with how I treat my financials, then I'm good. However, what they neglected is they were changing the definition of inventory when doing that. And that's where they got into a lot of trouble. So the IRS has issued regulations on January 5th, 2021. Those regulations basically said, if you, this is just a timing provision. So if something was not deductible for federal purposes, 471C didn't all of a sudden allow you to deduct something for federal purposes. It was more so intended to allow small businesses to not go through the burden of tracking inventory. But we're in an inventory where you have to track inventory all the way through the supply chain. This also separated the industry into two buckets, those making above 25 million and those making 25 million or less, which also didn't make sense when it first came out. So the regulations, when they came out, anyone who basically took 471C in 18, 19, or 20, you're going to have to file I think it's an 8275R, which basically says I took a position that's against what the regulations say. If cannabis isn't rescheduled or legalized by the end of 2022, you're triggering an audit when you file that, and you're going to lose the audit. I still see CPAs pushing businesses to take this. I saw one just recently where they filed a tax return under that. If you're going to do that, make sure you understand your CPA is basically saying you're about to go head to head with the IRS. So you're going to lawyer up, and that is a very expensive battle. I would recommend any social equity operator to let bigger operators fight that battle. I wouldn't want to loiter up and go head to head with the IRS about 280E being unconstitutional. I think it's wrong and it's messed up, especially with all these states legalizing cannabis, but that is where we're at. So really, you got to walk a fine line, understand where you're at with, you're either a producer or reseller, and make sure that you map your chart of accounts, do everything to understand what that exposure is. And if you are being aggressive, I would recommend as part of your risk assessment and controls is understanding what that exposure is, because audits normally come years after the fact. And if you were very aggressive for multiple years, guess what? They're not going to just audit 1 year. They're going to go back and look at several years, and you could have a tidal wave of back taxes. Now, when the Treasury did the report in March, the last thing I want to mention is they looked at California operators. The average California operator underreported their taxes in 2016 in compliance with 280E by $103,000. $103,000 1 year. That's an average, and that's 1 year. The main culprits were non-compliance with 280E, following 263A for allocating cost inventory instead of 471, as well as accelerated depreciation methods. You're not allowed, like most businesses can accelerate depreciation, you're not allowed to do that in cannabis. So as you can see, there are so many hurdles stacked against your business, right? But I would never recommend a business to use their resources to try to circumvent that. The way I preach it is you live with these rules as long as you're committed to being in this space, and you focus your resources on optimizing your top line and being a smart, well-run business. Because the way things are going, it's inevitable cannabis will be rescheduled. I hope for many sake that took 471C that happens in 2022. The reality of that actually happening in 2022 is probably still pretty low. So I would say just tread lightly until then. If someone's telling you something that sounds too good to be true, it most likely is. One good point that was brought up is even service providers can advise you. We're ultimately not on the hook for the decisions you make. You as business owners are responsible for your records, for all the decisions you make. And you can point when, the bus is coming to hit you, and you can try to pull people down with you. But in the end, you're the one that's responsible for all of that.
And that's a really good point. I want to hear more from Perry about his experience with selecting all of these different types of providers and addressing these situations. But I do just want to call out what you just said for a moment there, Kevin, because I have seen personally, working with different social equity applicants, I've seen service providers putting together business plans, prospectus, financial forecast, and they have bulked like everything under cost of goods sold. And I'm like, well, that's not cost of goods sold. You can't put your marketing budget under cost of goods sold. You haven't sold a good, and when the applicant kicked it back to the person, they said, well, I'm not a CPA. And it's like, okay, but you're still giving business advice. So, Perry, what has your experience been like? What have you learned? And any advice that you have from your experience that you could share with the audience and other social equity applicants would be great.
Along those lines, one thing I learned is that as an equity business owner, it's very important for you to keep your foot down as a business owner and CEO for equity preservation, meaning it can have power and control and decisions when it comes to your company, and also when it's risk as such when it comes to taxes. When it came with me personally, the first thing that I did was I made sure that I looked at anyone who I was dealing with to make sure that they specialized in the topic that we were dealing with. Starting off with the equity community, we had a lot of what I call property pimps that came into the community with hidden agendas that wasn't always transparent when it came to the contracts and everything else that came with an actual deal. With most equity business owners starting off, they never ran a company before, never dealt with taxes before, and didn't know none of the terminology when it came to legislation around this law. So with me, the first thing that I did was got me a lawyer. Thanks to San Francisco, we was able to get assistance, financial aid, in order for us to get good legal assistance. Some people may not be aware of that. So I've been working closely with the Success Center with Angela White, working really closely with her in order to train other equity applicants that's going through the pipeline and make sure that they're educated, they're making educated decisions, that's cannabis conscious decisions. So basically, it's education, being aware of who you're working with, what they know, what their capacity is, and if they don't, either you can try to find someone else. What I would say is use your legal representation to the fullest.
So let's talk about forming your entity and like business partners. I so the social equity laws are different in every jurisdiction. Massachusetts has different laws. California, San Francisco, LA, um, Colorado. All the laws that govern social equity are different. So I have seen certain jurisdictions say that you can be considered a social equity applicant if you own 33.3% of the business. 33.3% is not a controlling share in your business. So Perry, can you tell us from your perspective, why is it important to, as you say, be your own CEO, to keep your controlling share of your business? And has anyone ever asked you to give up more of your business? Like, what's your experience? What are your thoughts?
Early off, you first start and you get verified here in San Francisco. You have a list of incubators and other businesses that would like to be able to support, your company for their own reasons. So they make an attempt to, pair you up with the different companies that would like to be able to get a permit. By being an equity applicant, I have priority when it comes to the application and moving forward with a location. Through my experiences, I didn't had numerous investors I didn't have to turn down. It just wasn't a good fit. Sometimes their mission statement may not align with mine, and mine is to the best interest of the community and those most impacted by the war on drugs. Theirs may be something different, focused basically on capitalism. And I guess in some spaces, ain't nothing wrong with that. With me, structure was everything. By being the CEO, I don't want to dilute my equity. And equity preservation is something that we're really trying to put our foot down on to make sure that I have generational wealth. Other equity applicants have generational wealth and some type of benefit from the trials and errors that came from the war on drugs. So structuring is everything. I structure my company as an LLC, started off as a 100% owner, structured my company with the Office of Cannabis for the last 3 years, and was fortunate enough to come across an investor, which I'm not going to disclose, a partner that came to my aid at a time when I couldn't find any type of capital, couldn't find no real estate. So your partner is really important because you got to make sure that their due diligence, you do your due diligence on your partner to make sure that everything line up in order for them to be able to be accepted into the jurisdiction that they'll be coming in. Me, I've been fortunate to have a partner that's been building a friendship with me. Business is business, but in this situation, as I've seen when I first came into this industry, there were a lot of predatory deals and a lot of equity applicant businesses that went wayside due to the fact of, being a guinea pig type of a situation. I made sure that I stayed patient and I kept my eyes open to make the best decisions that was for my business instead of an individual decision.
Oops, I couldn't get off mute. So we're getting close to our time, but I'd like to just go through each panelist and have you share with the group what is, like, in 2 minutes or less, what's the most important thing from your sphere of influence, your realm of experience, that you feel like social equity applicants should know?
I would have to say that the first thing that a social equity applicant should know is the law, to know the actual equity initiative, to know the ins and outs and read in between the lines of that, because that is going to be how you're going to be able to gatekeep and also make the best decision. Also work closely with your city officials. I mean, whether it's in your Office of Cannabis or however that jurisdiction deal with this legislation, work closely with them in order to build some type of resources in the team around your decision and your business. Another thing is also to be able to network. Networking skills is really important when it comes down to it, because for me, myself, I say this field and this industry is my expertise. Although I came from the black market, that's where my equity start from, the education that I had from it. And it's making sure that you put that into a value system, that it is valued when it comes to business, using your experience. Some people want to have a retail. Me, I had a dream of having retail. I have a micro business. I want to grow. I want to do a little bit of everything. But some people may just have different angles that they want to have when they come inside this industry So just knowing what you want to do and where you want to go with it is important, because you could be steered in many directions if you don't know what you got going on.
And then Perry, really quickly, you had a question. It looks like it didn't get put into the Q&A. I can't see if it's Michael or Michelle. I apologize. My old eyes. So this viewer said, I've been thinking of using my platform to help educate, organize, and organize other social equity licensees. Perry, do you have any advice on how to start? I've seen predatory practices in Colorado as well. How do you motivate other social equity applicants to keep them from selling out?
Good question. I was told by my mentor, Angela White, and give shouts out to her through the Success Center. You know, Summer, they pretty much were gatekeeping around, you know, having workshops in the community. You can go ahead and start some outreach within those equity applicants to try to build a following for yourself. I have a platform where you're educating, but also getting them engaged in community activities, because it's not just business, but it's also political. It's also educational too. The education that comes behind cannabis is usually taboo when it comes down to it. So I think that you want to start with educating yourself furthermore, and also starting to engage your community, and, you know, just pointing out to others, looking at other different states and seeing the good things that they're doing within the equity process and some of the not so good things. And, you know, I mean, that's where you can come instead of, you know, be a part of the problem, not a part of the problem, but more of the solution. But just educating your team, and also just looking at the staggering rates of those that are locked up compared to businesses that's ran by Blacks or Latins, more people that's in jail for the crime than actually capitalizing on it. And if you get that knowledge to them, it kind of probably awake a sleeping giant.
Thanks, Perry. Great answer. Chris, 2 minutes or less. What, from your experience, should social equity applicants, what do they need to know?
That business is cutthroat and all those practices are predatory. So just keep an eye out. It doesn't matter if you're social equity or not, they're going to try to get you if they can. So have a good lawyer and do your due diligence. Don't be afraid to ask for help. You don't have to do everything on your own. That'd be my advice. You have a group of folks here. We represent just the tip of the iceberg. There are people out there that will love to help you out and give you advice. So I would suggest, like Perry suggested, networking. There's NCIA events, there's MCBA events, there's all sorts of minorities for medical marijuana. There's all sorts of events, social equity or otherwise in the industry in your city happening every single week. Get out there and talk to people, ask the questions. Don't put the whole burden on yourself. Get folks around you that are experts in their field that can give you the proper advice.
Thank you, Chris. Kevin, 2 minutes or less. What do social equity applicants and owners need to know?
I would say surround yourself with people with a variety of skills to help you navigate all the risks, insurance, security, accounting, legal, compliance. So it really takes a village. So you got to surround yourself with a variety of people. I think you have to do your own due diligence around the credibility of those providers that you are working with. And I can't, echo enough how important the numbers are, not only for you to be compliant, but numbers should help drive business decisions. And those that neglect their numbers, I've seen people that, they're 6 months behind recording transactions. So you're driving blind. You have to stay on top of timely, accurate numbers, because in this industry, you can't afford waste whatsoever. So if you're on the retail side, you have to understand what is moving. You have to understand all the data so you're properly stocking your inventory that is going to move. You don't want to deal with fire sales of stuff that's not selling in your demographics. So be committed to the numbers and the data, because with good data, you can forecast, project, you understand where things are going. So you're not too focused on just the now or worried about the past. You're actually forward looking. So instead of staring at your windshield, look down the road. And like Chris said, it's like get involved, get to know different people in different areas. It takes a village. Social equity, stand together. Together, you're a very strong voice working together towards the common goal. Just remember that, how powerful it is when we all stand together.
Thank you so much, Kevin.
You're welcome.
And so the advice that I have is to take good advice. I heard Kevin say that the value is in your license. So you already have something of value. Obviously, that's why people want to potentially prey on you. You know, the perception that social equity does not have the resources or the business acumen to fortify and protect their businesses. And take good advice, ask good questions, you know, and the networking thing is huge. So there's a reason that we're all members of the NCIA. It's an association, but I met Kevin at an NCIA event. You know, Perry, I brought Perry into NCIA. You know, Mike, we've done other projects together. Chris, we've done other projects together. You know, we are all here and invested in the industry for a reason, because we care about the industry, and we care about the people. So, you know, there is something to be said for understanding your position, right? And so social equity is a social justice program. It's not a social service program. So it's very important to remember that as well. So something has been returned to you that you were due, and it's your duty to protect it. So I want to thank everyone, and thank you all the panelists for sharing your wonderful insights. And I'll pass the mic back over to Mike and Brian. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Summer. Thank you, Chris, Perry, and Kevin. This was really awesome. Really appreciate all your time and your expertise and your willingness to share this with everybody. I just want to echo what everybody else said here, is that reach out to folks. You know, aside from the value of the license, it's also the value of your connection to the community and your experiences that are extremely valuable. And, you know, just one way to plug into NCIA, if you are a social equity applicant and you're not already a member, is we do have a program. I'm going to drop the link in here. It provides you with your first year of NCIA membership for free, as well as other special, unique benefits for our social equity applicants. So please, you know, feel free to join the program with us and join our community. We are building something here together with all these folks and with all of you. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass off to Brian. And yeah, we just really appreciate everybody being here today.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Mike and Summer, for wrapping up today's Catalyst conversations. It was really amazing to work together over the last few weeks to bring this program back to life and to really showcase a really interesting topic, and one that's really nuanced. And I think that we were able to really dive into some of the really deep elements of today's conversation together. So really excited to have all of you all participate in today's program. I really can't thank you all enough, as well as all of our sponsors that made today's program possible. So again, a huge thank you and shout out to Apteen, our presenting sponsor for today's program. And then, as Mike mentioned, a huge shout out and thank you to the benefactors of NCIA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion program, with this month's featured company being People's Ecosystem. People's Ecosystem really stepped up to the plate in advance of our Detroit conference last week, in which they helped sponsor and support, as well as March Networks with Chris Jensen right there, a DEI-focused workshop that was a really fantastic opportunity for all these local operators in the Detroit and Midwest market to learn more and network amongst themselves. So as Mike mentioned, please do not hesitate to follow up with Mike to learn more about how you can join the ranks of these pioneering businesses after today's broadcast wraps up. All right, perfect. And with that, thank you all so much for participating in another NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar. A huge thank you to all the members of NCIA's Risk Management and Insurance Committee, as well as our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for making today's program possible. And with that, we'll leave you all with this end of event credit sequence, highlighting all of the member businesses that currently make up our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion program, as well as the Risk Management and Insurance Committee. If you don't see your business listed here, don't be discouraged. That just means that you need to head to thecannabisindustry.org/join following today's broadcast to link into our amazing network. So with that, thank you all so much. We look forward to seeing you all again for a future NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar. We'll see you all next time.